He kicked her, right in front of us, Jenna whispered, the words barely crossing the cracked pavement outside a small Catholic chapel in Riverbend, Oklahoma. A bronze figure of the Virgin stood there with open arms and a soft gaze, quiet as the morning breeze. What unfolded on that spring afternoon would leave an entire campus stunned, and a young man on his knees in a way no one there had ever pictured. Lucas Carter, 21, a philosophy major at the local university, was the kind of student professors called razor-sharp and classmates called charming, if also reckless. He could dismantle an argument like it was a lab project, and he made a sport out of sneering at anything that smelled like tradition. Riverbend sits squarely in America's Bible Belt, where steeples still rival water towers and Friday night lights pause for prayer. Lucas wanted nothing to do with it. He was raised in walls where Sunday sermons once hung in the air, but somewhere between childhood reverence and dorm room debates, belief slipped through his fingers, or maybe he flung it away. Carlos, a student who often prayed with friends on the lawn, shook his head remembering Lucas's favorite jab. You kneel to stone. I kneel to no one. Quick aside, if stories like this draw you in, hit subscribe and drop your city and what time it is right now in the comments. Back to it. On that April day, the sun spilled a warm sheen across the grass. A few students knelt, some murmuring prayers, others simply letting silence carry them. Then Lucas appeared, backpack slung, earbuds dangling, agitation worn like a badge. He stopped, scowled, and the scene hung still. Then came the thud, his boots smacking the base of Mary's statue. Phones flew up, voices caught, hearts skipped. The world tilted for a second, Jenna said. Father Anthony, the parish priest, stepped through the wooden doors. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. He met Lucas's eyes and said quietly, Son, when you hit her, you bruise your own mother's heart. The crowd went mute. Lucas scoffed and drifted off toward the sidewalk. Cameras had already done their work. Within hours, the clip swept through dorms and group chats, faith versus fury on a loop. And no one yet knew that, within a day, the same kid who mocked prayers would be found in that church, not kicking, not laughing, but on his knees and drenched in tears. How does arrogance fracture into brokenness? And brokenness start to look like belief. Stay with me. The collision didn't come out of nowhere. It had simmered for weeks. Lucas had grown increasingly short-tempered whenever he passed the church lawn and saw undergrads with bowed heads. To him, their posture looked like surrender, their hands like shackles. Over meals and late-night debates, he called religion poison, something to dull the mind. If God's real, let him stop me, he told Ryan during one of those marathon dorm lounge arguments. It was never enough for him to disbelieve. He needed to dismantle belief for everyone else, too. That Thursday, the sky was bright, and the air carried the sweet scent of lilacs. A small group, mostly Latino and Filipino Catholics, knelt before the statue outside St. Luke's Parish. They were praying quiet intentions. Exams, jobs, grandparents, peace. Nothing flashy, nothing staged. Lucas halted at the sidewalk, jaw clenched, fists tightening in his hoodie pocket. For a heartbeat, it seemed like he might keep walking. Then something snapped. Maybe the stillness, maybe the calm he couldn't find inside himself. He crossed the grass in sharp strides. The rustle of his boots made heads lift. He drew back his leg and slammed his foot into the statue's base. The sound landed heavy, like a punch nobody saw coming. Gasps cut the air. Jenna's rosary hit the ground. Carlos stepped forward out of reflex, as if he could shield bronze with human hands. A phone camera blinked red, capturing everything. It felt like watching someone slap your mother, Anna said later, voice shaking. Lucas skimmed the stunned faces and muttered, Stone won't save you. Wake up. It's all in your heads. Tension spiked, shouts, fists the start of something ugly. Before it boiled over, the church doors opened, and Father Anthony walked out, black cassock brushing the steps, the look of a man who had shepherded through decades of joy and grief. He drew close, didn't call security, didn't preach, just, "Son, when you strike at her, it's your own mother's heart you wound." The words hit harder than any swing. Lucas wavered, then snapped back, "She's just plaster. So are your beliefs," and left, his footsteps tapping against concrete. Phones kept rolling as Father Anthony bent low and rubbed a thumb along the scuff. The statue was fine, a faint streak, nothing more. But the ache it stirred was anything but small. By evening, the video had a name, The Kick. Comments piled in, some mocking, many outraged. The parish's page filled with messages. "We're praying for him." Lucas watched his own smirk replay on his screen, turn away, and try to laugh. But the priest's sentence chased him into the night. That single thud didn't fade when Lucas walked off. It settled into the hearts of the kids who had been kneeling. For them, it wasn't just disrespect. It cut like a wound. Carlos said it felt like someone spitting on his grandmother's face. His abuela had placed the rosary in his small hands years ago. The video raced through campus like brush fire. In lounges, screens brightened with the freeze frame of Lucas's leg mid-swing, the statue shivering with impact. The cafeteria buzzed. Some shrugged. "It's just a statue." Anna responded fast. "It's not the stone. It's what it stands for." Within hours, the news seeped beyond the university. Retired vets in the back pews heard about it. Mothers who light candles for their kids heard. Immigrants who carried devotion across oceans heard. Each felt their own faith take a hit. Father Anthony's phone wouldn't rest. Calls for penalties, for expulsion, others pleading for mercy. He stayed measured, fingertips on worn rosary beads, advising everyone the same way. "Keep him in your prayers." Meanwhile, Lucas stood in harsher light. At the gym, a student squared up and said, "Kick me instead of her." Lucas shrugged it off, forced bravado, hands trembling as he pushed them deeper into his pockets. Back in the dorm, his roommate scrolled and snorted. "Dude, you're everywhere. Half this town's furious. The other half just thinks you're ridiculous." Lucas let out a thin laugh that fooled nobody. In the mirror, the face that used to feel like victory looked hollow. What jarred him most wasn't the hate. It was that calm, steady voice. Hit her, bruise your mother's heart, looping like a song he didn't choose. The line wedged itself under his ribs and turned. It dragged up things he'd kept buried. A father lost to addiction, a mother weighed down by life, a home that came apart at the seams. He had trained himself to survive with wit, not prayer. But that sentence kept pointing at a wound he didn't want to examine. Near midnight, he slipped outside. The quad was slick with dew, lights stretching long shadows across walkways. He walked without aim, trying to outrun the quiet. At every turn, a face rose in his mind. Mary's, not scolding, not angry, just sorrowful. Those eyes unsettled him more than any French atheist ever had. A group of students passed. Someone hissed his name. Shame clung. "Maybe I crossed the line," he admitted under his breath. The words startled him. He drifted back to the dorm and dropped on his bed. Sleep, when it came, wasn't rest. It dragged him someplace deeper. He dreamed he was in a wide, empty field under a sky spinning with dark cloud. Far off, the statue of Mary, impossibly tall, glowed against the storm. He tried to step toward her, but the ground gave way, splitting like cracked glass. He fell, plunging through a tunnel of voices that sneered and laughed. Faces from lecture halls and hallways crowded the edges. Atheist, coward, lost. Their words pinballed around him. He clawed for something solid and found nothing but air. Then, out of the shadows, a pale hand reached down, delicate, steady, unafraid. He grabbed it with everything in him. Heat shot through his chest, chasing away the cold that had wrapped around his lungs. The jeers dimmed. The falling slowed. He lifted his gaze. A woman in white looked back at him, familiar and somehow brand new. Not stern, not smug, sorrowful, yes, but with compassion so strong it hurt. He knew that face even as he refused to name it. He woke with a choking gasp. 3:07 a.m., glancing red on the clock. His pillow was damp, his hands shaking. He told himself it was nothing but a dream, an overworked brain, and too much caffeine. Only it didn't feel like that. It felt real in a way his arguments never did. Fear prickled, not the kind he could flatten with logic. Under that fear lay something softer he couldn't identify, without saying a word he'd mocked. Longing. Morning came like any other day in Riverbend. Students shuffled with coffee, buses hissed, and the faint scent of bacon slipped from the dining hall. Lucas said nothing about the dream. He rammed it under sarcasm and noise, like he always did. But the image stuck to him, a smell you can't wash out. He kept moving, trying not to notice that for once movement wasn't helping. And still, what was coming didn't announce itself. It just waited for him at a crosswalk, seconds from changing everything. By mid-afternoon, he headed back from class, hoodie up, earbuds dangling without music. At Maple and Grant, he walked straight through a red light, thoughts knotted and eyes unfocused. A delivery truck tore down the lane, horns slicing the air. "Hey, watch it," someone yelled from behind. Time stretched long and thin. Chrome flashed, brakes screamed. His body wouldn't move. He froze like an animal in a beam. Then, he felt it. Something grabbed him from the chest and yanked. No hand clutching his hoodie. No arm around his shoulder. Just a hard, unseen pull. He stumbled backward, landed awkwardly on the curb. The truck blew past, and the gust slapped his face. For a few breaths, he didn't hear the city around him, just the blood in his ears. "You okay, man?" A student called across the street, voice shaky. Lucas nodded, but his knees weren't steady. He looked at the crosswalk he'd nearly died in. A slice of sun cut through clouds and stroked the asphalt. In that shimmer, he thought he saw the faint outline of a hand, thin, luminous there and gone. He blinked until his eyes watered. "No," he muttered, raking a hand through his hair. "Just adrenaline. Just the mind playing tricks." He shook his head like that could knock the thought out. Only the fear didn't drain away. It clung, not just to the near miss, but to the feeling that something more than luck had tugged him clear. Back at the dorm, his roommate found him blank-faced at the desk, the glow of a laptop turning his skin pale. "Dude, what happened? You look like you saw a ghost." Lucas forced a laugh. "Almost became roadkill," he said. "Lucky, man." The word caught in his throat. Lucky didn't feel right. He left out the rest. The pull, the flash, the way his whole chest had jolted like a heart restarted. In the quiet of the early hours, he rolled onto his side, the room washed in streetlight. Without deciding to, he whispered into the dark, "Why did you save me?" The syllables shocked him the second they left. He had spent years calling prayer a crutch, a fairy tale for people who can't face life. And now he'd prayed by accident. He groaned and pressed the heel of his hand to his forehead, furious with himself. But something had cracked wider than his anger. For the first time in a long time, he couldn't quite say he was alone. The next day, the campus hummed like any weekday, professors scratching formulas on whiteboards, laptops chiming, the vending machines clicking through choices. For most people, it was just a Friday. Lucas felt like he was underwater. The truck scream replayed in a loop, but more than that, the yank he couldn't explain pressed on his chest. He tried to concoct a tidy answer. "Luck. Reflex. Misperception. Still, the same question gnawed. What if it wasn't? By late afternoon, he drifted toward the library, not chasing insight, just a corner to disappear into. Outside the glass doors, a small flower stand stood like a quiet punctuation. The woman behind it, the lines of her face gentle, hair streaked silver under a scarf, lifted a sunflower and smiled. "You look like you could use a little color," she said, voice steady, kind. He meant to brush past. Something in her tone tugged him to a stop. "I don't really do flowers," he muttered. "That's all right," she said. "Sometimes flowers aren't for buying. Sometimes they're for remembering." Her name was Mrs. Parker. She talked softly about how she started selling bouquets near campus years ago after her son was killed in a school shooting in another state. No bitterness in her voice, just the worn softness of someone who had carried grief far longer than feels human. "I thought my life was over," she said. "I yelled at God. I hated everything." Lucas stood awkwardly, waiting for her to tell him she'd thrown faith away. She didn't. "Then I dreamt I was in a dark room. My boy was crying, and I couldn't reach him. A woman in white held him. She looked at me with eyes that knew everything. I knew it was Mary, and I knew he wasn't alone." The words hit him square. He flashed back to his own dream, the hand in the dark, the face that didn't accuse but ached for him. Mrs. Parker glanced over at the church across the street. "I don't have answers," she said quietly, "but when I pray the rosary, I feel held. It's how I keep going." Lucas swallowed. The reflexive skepticism that usually fired before he even thought stayed stuck. He finally asked, "And if that was just your mind?" She smiled. "Maybe. If so, my mind gave me the peace I couldn't find anywhere else. Either way, I was saved. But I believe she came." He didn't buy a flower, but when he walked away, the scent of roses followed him down the steps. That night, in the stubborn quiet of his room, he kept seeing the same thing: white fabric, gentle eyes, a hand reaching, and a question he didn't want to answer. Why do I keep seeing her too? Saturday rolled in with Riverbend's usual rhythm. College kids streaming to coffee shops, families with carts rattling through grocery aisles, old trucks with bass-powered speakers rumbling the curb. But for Lucas, the ground had tilted. He fought the impulse to avoid the church and lost. Near evening, he drifted back towards St. Luke's. The lawn was empty, the statue standing calm beneath a lowering sky. Open arms, steady gaze, unmoved, unbothered, almost expectant. He stopped at the border where grass met sidewalk. His foot remembered the kick before his mind did. The sound, the shock in the faces, the priest's voice. He expected to feel a lash of anger from someone, a whisper behind him. Nothing, just the soft hum of town. He stepped closer. A scuff showed at the base where his boot had landed. As the sun slipped toward the horizon, light caught the line so it shimmered, a thin silver thread in bronze. He rubbed his eyes. The glow stayed. "Do you see it too?" a small voice asked. He turned. A little girl, maybe 8, stood a few steps away in a pink jacket with sleeves too long, blonde pigtails bouncing against her shoulders. Freckles dusted her nose. "See what?" he said. She pointed at the statue. "The light. It means she's still here. She never leaves us." The words tightened his throat. "Who told you that?" She shrugged. "My grandma. She says Mary always stays, even when people are mean to her." Lucas looked back at the statue. The faint gleam flickered as if stirred by breath. When he turned again, the girl was already skipping toward the sidewalk, humming. Within seconds, she vanished into Saturday. For a beat, he wondered if he dreamed her. Back on campus, he couldn't focus on anything. His roommate cracked jokes, checked scores. None of it landed. Lucas drew lines on a scrap sheet without knowing, an outline of a hand, a pair of eyes, the curve of a robe. In the dining hall, someone hissed, "That's the guy." Another muttered, "He'll regret it." For once, he didn't get defensive. He just felt profoundly tired. Later, he wandered past St. Luke's again. The lawn was shadowed, the statue lit by one street lamp. The branches overhead rattled like quiet applause. He stared at her face, and across the hush, a whisper seemed to ride the air. "I never leave." He spun around. Nothing but empty sidewalk and the low hum of distant cars. "I'm losing it," he said under his breath. But another voice in him, quieter, truer, answered back. Or maybe you're finally hearing. Riverbend slept, but not the room where Lucas stared at a ceiling tile that wouldn't move. He pressed a pillow over his face and told himself what he always told himself. It's just guilt, nerves, too many opinions from strangers online. He said it until the words ran out of meaning. Closer to 2, exhaustion dragged him under. The dream put him in a cavernous stadium where no one sat. Bleachers curled and rusted. The sky boiled black without rain, and smoke hung where air should have been. A disembodied voice laughed. "So you think you're strong?" The ground split, and he dropped, down into a pit steeped in mocking voices. He recognized them. Kid from class, faces from parties, strangers from the comments. Words stuck like burrs: atheist, coward, lost boy. The cold burrowed to his bones. He tried to scream. Sound dissolved in the dark. He reached out, and there was again the glow, faint at first, that grew until it cut the black. A hand reached for him, slender and sure. He grabbed. Warmth rolled through him like a tide. The darkness writhed and thinned. He looked up and saw her, no crown, no thunder. A woman in white, steady as a sunrise. Her eyes held him the way a mother holds a child who has finally come home. He didn't see her lips move, but her voice filled him. "You are not alone. Come back." Tears slid in the dream, as if his waking body had forgotten how to keep them. "Why me?" he asked, voice raw. "After what I've done. After everything." The glow gathered him, lifted him, and the sky cracked open with light. He woke sitting bolt upright, drenched and shaking, heartbeat loud enough to hear. 3:11 a.m. The numbers glowed relentless. He covered his face with both hands. He had known nightmares, midterms, missed flights, fights with his mother in which nobody said what mattered. But this felt different, like a memory dropped into his life from somewhere else. "No," he whispered, rocking. "This can't be happening. I don't believe this." Then, softer, the part of him without mask, "But I saw her." That admission terrified him because it meant the armor he'd welded on was cracking. It meant the story he told himself about strength might be a disguise for fear. He sobbed quietly, trying not to wake his roommate, feeling small in a way he hadn't felt since he was 10. Unknown, unheld, haunted by the need for a mother he'd spent years ignoring. In the dark, a battle pushed toward its finish, pride against surrender, doubt against mercy. And he knew he couldn't outrun it much longer. Sunday arrived under a low lid of gray cloud. Bells from St. Luke's drifted across Riverbend, a sound most folks barely registered anymore. To Lucas, each toll landed like a summons. He paced his room, blasted music, then killed it in a panic, as if the sound made it worse. The image of the woman in white, of that hand tugging him from the pit, wouldn't fade. Near mid-morning, something finally gave way inside. He pulled on his hoodie and slipped into the damp air, letting his feet turn him toward the place he least wanted to go. The church stood on its corner like it always had. Doors open, candles flickering, someone humming almost under their breath. Lucas paused at the steps, lungs stuck high in his chest. He pictured the whispers if anyone recognized him. The kid from the video, the one who kicked. Shame screamed for him to pivot and run. He looked up at the figure of Mary above the doorway. In the ashy light, bronze warmed to honey, and for once, Her face didn't look like it was judging him. It felt like an invitation. He stepped in. The scent of wax and incense brushed him, the very smell he used to mock his magic tricks. Stained glass threw blue and red over old wood. A few people scattered the pews, kneeling or just breathing. At the front, Mary stood as she had before. After a few heavy steps, Lucas's knees just gave. He dropped, no drama, no calculation, onto the cold, worn floor. His breath clawed for air. Then came the sobs, raw and loud enough to bounce off the rafters. Heads turned. No one moved to shush him. No one grabbed him by the elbow. The building held his grief like a vessel. "I'm sorry," he choked out between breaths. "I'm so sorry. Please, please forgive me." The words poured out, years of scorn and ache cracking into confession. He cried for the statue, for the prayers he'd mocked, for the family fractures he'd plastered over with sarcasm. An elderly woman with silver hair glanced over later and said it wasn't a troublemaker you saw. It was a soul being born in the back pews. Father Anthony came quietly and recognized him immediately. He didn't scold. He put a steady hand on Lucas's shoulder. "She never turns her children away," he said, hardly above a whisper. That sentence undid him all over again. Lucas pressed his forehead to the wood. Surrender didn't feel like defeat anymore. It felt like relief. Outside, the bells measured time. Inside, a voice rose from him again, stronger this time. "Forgive me. Please." Father Anthony knelt and pressed a small rosary into his palm. "You don't have to carry this alone," he murmured. "She's waiting." Lucas gripped the beads like a lifeline. The priest began the Hail Mary softly. A few voices joined. Lucas didn't know the words, but as the prayer lifted, something inside shifted. Pride came apart at the seams. Anger ebbed. In its place, a small root of trust took hold. Fragile but real. He finally stood, face wet and hands shaking, and looked at the statue not with defiance, but with a reverence that surprised him. Sunlight shouldered its way through the cloud and poured through the stained glass, washing the church in warmth. Coincidence to some, a sign to others. To Lucas, it was enough. He understood he wouldn't be the same. By Monday, the clip of the kick was still lighting up phones, but now, something quieter threaded through hallway chatter. People said they'd seen him in the church, not posturing, not spoiling for a fight, kneeling, crying, clutching a rosary. Some refused to buy it. No chance, they mutter by the soda machines. Others nodded like they recognized the ache, the kind that bends your intellect in two and asks bigger questions. Reporters tried to wheedle details for Father Anthony. He declined with a small smile. "A heart found its way home," he said, and that was that. Jenna put it in her own words. "I thought I'd remember him as the guy who kicked Mary. Now I'll remember him as the one she forgave." In Riverbend, where faith can be routine and cynicism just as predictable, Lucas's story nudged something awake. Students who hadn't prayed since childhood started slipping into evening Massachusetts. Others pulled Bibles off shelves for the first time in years. Even skeptics traded the cheap shots for real questions. And Lucas, the boy who swore he'd kneel to no one, didn't turn into a saint overnight. He still stumbled. Doubts didn't evaporate when he walked out of that church, but a difference showed up in the quiet ways. The rosary lived in his pocket. When fear rose or old habits itched, he fingered the beads and breathed. He slid into the back pews at St. Luke's without fanfare, just to be near. People who knew him noticed the change, a gentler tone, a patience that hadn't been there before, a crack in the armor that used to keep everyone at arm's length. He didn't post a testimony thread. He didn't argue anyone into belief or out of it. The story traveled by whisper, by witness, by the fact that people saw him differently because he was different. In the end, this isn't only about Lucas Carter. It's about what happens when pride hits mercy head-on, when rebellion bumps into forgiveness and loses. It's about a truth older than any philosophy seminar and louder than cynicism on a loudspeaker. Grace still finds a way. Some will label it coincidence. Others will roll their eyes and call imagination. But those who watched him fold at the altar, those who heard the crack in his voice when he said, "Forgive me," they call it something else. They call it a miracle. If this moved you, tap like, subscribe for more true stories of hope, and tell us in the comments what you'd love to hear next.